we have another week that's really strong at running back, and a lot of those guys are somewhat restrictive in terms of their salary. So I think like at least looking at your list of players here, I think we're going to find like some unique ways to pay up. Like, so the roster construction pivots here seem like they might be a play. Is that kind of how you've been approaching things so far on like your early builds?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of it is just flipping the build contrarian roster constructions, because a lot of people are going to fall into, like you said, probably those 6K ish running backs, except for maybe Eckler. And then it's just going to be, do they pay up for Josh Allen, or do they pay down for Aaron Rodgers or one of these other quarterbacks that are in this like low 6K range? So we're going to get a lot of those very similar builds. So there are some ways to get away from that. And then it's just, there's only 10 games on the slate, so we'll have some weird condensed ownerships on maybe players or spots that aren't as good as the ownership might suggest, just because there are fewer plays. So I think maybe this is the week that we get away from the chalk just absolutely destroying, because I think some of the chalk is just by the nature of it being a smaller slate.
Like, I can dream, man. Are we going to get a week where the chalk fails and we can win some money?
Well,
See.
it will be tricky. People have to remember, if you're using like a optimizer where you're setting your max ownership percentage, like it might look like the chalk is doing okay this week, but with fewer players, like there's just going to be more guys that are in that like 15 to 20% range, right? So don't get too scared. I think this could be a fun one for us.
That's a good point. We'll get to it later on in the show, but PrizePicks specifically has been kind of saving me. The GPP bros, it's been a rough start to the year from like a DraftKings and FanDuel perspective, but thank God for PrizePicks, man. And I have a couple relating to some of the players that we're going to talk about. Let's start with Kyler Murray. He's 7,400 against Seattle. This is one of the two later games in the slate. We have this game against Seattle that looks pretty nice at 4 p.m. But tell us your thoughts and your thought process with Kyler Murray, with most people, like you said, paying up for Josh Allen.
Yep. The highest game total on the slate, 49.5, tied with one or two other games, I believe. Kyler at 74 is in kind of that awkward salary range that I mentioned, where people are going to be paying up for Josh, paying down for Aaron Rodgers or some of those other like Trevor Lawrence type guys in that salary range. But Arizona still has a nice total, 25.75. And this week really comes down to like, can the Bills not go nuclear, right? As long as that doesn't happen, and with only 10 games on a slate, it's a spot where if we like a situation like we do here, we can pretty comfortably stack it. If Josh and Diggs don't go nuts, you're probably going to be able to stay ahead of the field if you can hit on that game. This is the only game on the slate where both teams are top 10 in neutral pace, and the Arizona offense is one that people have been a little disappointed on all year, but since DeAndre Hopkins has come back, they have looked really good. Kyler Murray had his best fantasy outing of the year last year. They were behind a little bit, but still, I don't think it's a coincidence that that happened with Nuke coming back. You mentioned the 4:05 start time. That's not going to be as beneficial as some other weeks. Just so much of what is important, the popular plays are going to be on the early slate, but it's still nice to have some flexibility, right? So if we do, even if we're only skinny stacking, say Kyler and Nuke, it's still a lot of salary that you can move around with. Fewer options, obviously, only a couple quarterbacks you could pivot off of Kyler. But if you end up heavily stacking this game, you can use the early information and late swap. It's always something we want to be giving ourselves some kind of outs.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's not going to be a ton of chalk, I don't think, in those afternoon games. Probably Kenneth Walker, and I mean, there's a lot of great running back plays, so maybe not even to that degree. Higbee, maybe Godwin, those type of guys. So yeah, not a ton of flexibility on the slate. That's a great point. One thing that I did notice on the PrizePicks side of things, Kyler over 35.5 rushing yards, is 67.3% favorite to cash, according to our friends over at Run the Sim. So if you want to take advantage of that, free bet, link in the description. Free $100 bet, I should say. Promo code Holka, and a lot of good stuff this week over there. Running back, Dalvin Cook, 7,800 at Washington. Like I said, it does seem like a really strong running back week. Dalvin wasn't one that was necessarily on my radar, but the ceiling is definitely there if he can put some things together, I think.
Yeah, the thing that just made Dalvin pop is that, as I mentioned, we just don't have that many players on the slate, right? So the guys that are obvious starters, I have 4 guys on 4 for 4 projected for over 20% ownership, with Travis Etienne being the most popular, but then you got Dalvin Cook kind of right in the middle of Eckler at top, and then a couple guys priced below him that are going to be pretty popular. All those 6K guys we talked about. Jacobs is going to be very popular. I think Jones will be popular. So you get a big workload running back at low ownership. He's probably the only one on the slate. If Jonathan Taylor doesn't play, he practiced. That's like a 20 touch guy that is going to be in single digits in terms of ownership. Now, Washington is a pass funnel defense, so the matchup isn't going to have Dalvin popping, but Minnesota is favored. They've been playing by head a lot this year. They run a lot of plays, and they don't throw deep a lot, so they are moving the ball slowly down the field, maximizing that touchdown variance. We don't know. It's not like Justin Jefferson's just breaking, 30, 40-yard touchdowns. So Dalvin will have opportunities near the goal line. Obviously, you are hoping for the touchdowns, but we also saw his passing game work spike last week, 6 targets last week. So that's obviously very good for DraftKings as well. So I kind of like, I think you could do some mini stacks just with Minnesota, like same team stacks. I think you could do like a Dalvin Thielen type thing. But that 7,800 price tag on Dalvin, kind of similar to Murray, it'll give you it'll help you have a unique build, at least in terms of roster construction.
Yeah, the comfortable thing for most people is just going to be to pay down to ETN, to pay down for even Joe Mixon at 6,500. So seeing a lot of those type of guys pop in the Sims right now. But from a leverage perspective, definitely with you on Dalvin. This is one that seems like the max leverage play of the week. It's Devontae Adams. He's 8,100 at Jacksonville. We talked about how Jacobs is still going to continue to carry a decent amount of ownership, and then Adams kind of burning some of the GPP bros last week. Again, in a game that's going to be pretty popular here against Jacksonville, Devontae, I mean, are people going to go back there? It sounds like you think they won't.
Yeah, I think people are probably going to be pretty nervous about the Raiders passing game in general. I was looking at original ownership projections, saw ETN and Jacobs up at the top. So the obvious question is, how can we leverage that? Do we want to leverage that? I don't think I want to leverage it by stacking the Raiders by playing Adams, because there are some really strong quarterback plays on the slate. I don't think that the pass game gets there as a whole, but obviously Devontae could get there by himself. 8,100, he's the only wide receiver priced above 8K that is projecting for single digit ownership. None of the guys are going to be like crazy popular, but Cup will get some. Jefferson will get some. Obviously, Diggs will get a fair amount with that game. But we're getting the leverage off of both running backs in this game. He's coming off of a one catch game after 3 straight 95 plus yard performances, with 2 games over 100 yards in there. So a lot of his metrics are going to be skewed by last week, where he only saw 5 targets. So his target share numbers over the last month are down. But going into last week, he was any volume or share number, he was at or near the top of the league. So that should bounce back. It's not necessarily a squeaky wheel treatment, because I don't think he is complaining per se, but I don't think the Raiders and Devontae Adams are going to let Devontae Adams have another game like that after only 1 catch.
Yeah, Darren Waller was limited in practice yesterday as well with that hamstring injury. So if we don't get him, we might even see some ownership condense on someone like Foster Moreau. So keep an eye on that. He's kind of in this exact price point as this tight end we're about to talk about. Moreau is 3,200, but then Evan Ingram 3,300 in the same exact game. So the tight ends, the cheap side of the tight end spectrum, going to be pretty popular in this game, I think. But it sounds like Ingram is the guy you're leaning towards.
Yeah, I'll like Ingram even more if Waller is out and we get that heavy ownership on Moreau. We already see in that 3K range, I have Dawson Knox, Hayden Hurst, and Robert Tonyan all projecting above Evan Ingram in terms of projected ownership. So Ingram at 3,300, like he'll get some, but especially if Moreau ends up being chalky too, he could, end up only like a 5 or 6% guy. Over the last month, Evan Ingram, 2nd in targets among tight ends, 6th in target share among tight ends, 3rd in air yards per game among tight ends, and 4th in expected fantasy points. The Raiders are one of 4 teams that rank outside the top 20 in schedule adjusted points allowed to every single skill position. They're also 31st in pass EPA per play allowed. So there's lots of ways to attack the Raiders defense. Again, leverage off of these very popular running backs. ATN is a solid value, but when I got both of these running backs projecting at 20-25%, it's pretty tempting to want to leverage with some pass catchers in this game.
Love it. Before we build a DraftKings lineup, just wanted to thank everyone who signed up for a free 7-day trial for the premium newsletter so far this year. The percentage of people just in general that we've seen after just 8 weeks convert over to a paid subscriber really blown me away so far. So appreciate you guys out there that have tried it out. If you want to try it out this week, there is a link in the description. Again, 7-day free trial, so no risk whatsoever. TJ, let's go ahead and build a DraftKings lineup. Where do you want to start with this one?
Let's start with the stack. Let's go. Let's go Kyler. I think probably skinny with Nuke. He's just dominate. Obviously, if you're playing Kyler, you can double him. I think doubling him with Rondale or Ertz is fine. I think I'm gonna have a tough time with like Hopkins and Murray's salary, wanting Ertz's salary if I'm doubling, just because it's pretty expensive for the tight end slot. So I think you could probably get away with singling Kyler Murray, single stacking him. I like bringing back Kenneth Walker. I think he'll probably be in that like second or third tier of ownership. Like he'll be double digits, but I don't think he won't be in that 20% range like the Jacobs and the Mixons right behind ETN. I don't think.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I just have like crazy recency bias because that DeAndre Hopkins touchdown happened like right in front of me last week, literally. So what a grab from that guy. I guess we didn't talk about your defense, TJ. So Vikings defense at 3,500. I don't think many people are going to make it to this salary range with some really nice options in the lower end, and then also Tampa Bay at 3K. So tell us why you like the Vikings D this week.
Yeah, I'm never like a big fan of paying up to be contrarian necessarily. Especially if I'm just like forcing it. We just even like with defense salary being fairly sharp this year, we just still don't see a lot of expensive defenses. It just really limits the ceiling of your lineup. But I think this is an okay spot to do it, especially if you're pairing them with Dalvin. I think you might end up getting a little leverage off of the play because Washington defense is so cheap that I think they could end up drawing some ownership. So if we see like a, I don't know, 13 or 14% Washington defense, then you could get Vikings in the same game at 3 or 4%. I kind of like that. And then even though Washington doesn't throw a ton, it does look like Vikings should have some defensive scoring opportunities, 6 in adjusted sack rate. According to Football Outsiders, Washington is 26 in adjusted sack rate allowed. So should be some pressure opportunities on Heineke there.
Okay. So I threw Dalvin in there just to see what would happen if we put Evan Ingram at tight end,
like
and
that.
we can adjust that, of course. But we're getting a little bit lower on salary now, so 4,600. So I guess are there cheaper wide receivers that you are kind of eyeing early in the week? I don't think we're going to make it to Devontae on this team, obviously, so we're going to need some value.
What about this? I don't know if this is going to get steamed by the time Sunday rolls around, but with the Chargers injuries, could we play a 3,500 Michael Bandy?
Michael Bandy, we could. I mean,
six targets
in
the last game. I think probably people will land on Palmer because he is the best, perceived to be the best. He's good, but I think people will gravitate towards him more. But yeah, I think all the cheap receivers will probably end up getting some ownership. But if we're getting a 3,500 Bandy, if we can get him at like 13%, I think it'll probably be okay. If he ends up being 20%, I'd probably end up being off this play. But for this lineup, saving that salary is probably cool.
You're gonna save, $800 from people that are even gonna take like a flyer on DeAndre Carter too. So I don't know. I guess this could be the week where you pick the right cheap charger. Like that's all you need. So I don't know. We'll see. That's interesting. 5,200 for a wide receiver and a flex now. So definitely a little bit more room. Let's see.
Too high. What about going all in on the Vikings and throwing Thielen in this lineup? Even though a double with the defense probably isn't great, but I actually have seen it work in a winning DraftKings lineup this year. So if they just roll,
he's gonna be like unowned too, because all the people are just gonna be like, "Oh, Hawkinson's gonna come in and take all the touchdowns." You know what I mean? So that gets us to 4,800 in the flex. So we're like just above the range where it starts to get really gross. So we got Gerald Everett. If we want to go 2 tight end, we could go Garrett Wilson on the other side of that Buffalo game. We could go Claypool in his debut for Chicago to get a piece of that Miami game. Reynolds. There's a couple guys here. Kyle Pitts. If the tight ends are kind of popping in this range, I don't know if we necessarily want to go that direction. We still have the option to pay down a little bit more defense if we really wanted to.
What if we throw. I mean, he's listed questionable, but he had an injury designation last week. What about Mac Hollins? He's been out targeting, out route
Yeah.
running Hunter Renfro, and I know I said I don't love stacking that game, but it does give us a double leverage spot off those running backs and a mini with. It's a cheap mini too, so we're not investing a ton in
Yeah.
it in Ingram and Mac Hollins.
I like it. Sometimes just like getting access to those games with like lower owned but cheaper plays, like that's all you really need. And then you just need some of the more expensive guys in that game to fail, and you're vaulting all those people in the leaderboard.